Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast. I'm your co-host, Maria Casillas, and of course, joined here by my incredible co-host, Cody Sizemore. And today, we're actually also joined by an incredible guest that we're excited to introduce to you, but not before we get through some of our own personal tasks. One of the things we want to just do, as we do every single week, is thank you. If you are an every weeker and have tuned into the show every single week, we just want to remind you how important you are to us and how much we appreciate you doing that. We know your time is valuable, and the fact that you find so much value here that you're willing to trade that time for it, we just want to say thank you. And if this is the first time you are tuning into our podcast, we encourage you to go back, listen to some of the older episodes, and continue to tune in each and every week. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce Lauri Palau. She is the host of This Organized Life podcast, and we are just honored to have her here to share with you about some stuff that we probably haven't really touched on in this podcast very often. And that is how to be organized and how to take everything that Lauri is going to share with us today and implement it, if I can get that word out, implement it into your coaching business, no matter what stage of your business you are in. So, Lauri, welcome to our show today.
Thank you guys so much for having me. And let me just put a disclaimer out there. You don't have to take every single thing I say. Maybe take one or two things, like let's lower the bar. It doesn't have to be everything, you know? So, it's all good. And I'm really excited because I'm like, in full disclosure, I am like a secret, like nerd when it comes to finances and budgeting. I'm like a little crazy about that. So when you guys approached me about being on the show, I was very excited because I was like, oh yes, this is going to be awesome. So thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not a problem. This is, I think Maria kind of said it when she was bringing it in. This is something we don't really talk enough about. I think probably because we're not very organized with it. But, it's something that like we need to, because it's being organized within your own practice, within your own business is just so important. It makes everything so much more smooth, and it allows more clients to come in. You'd have a better experience with them to have a better experience with you, everything, So, why don't you just tell the listeners a little bit about you and what you do and kind of like how you got into it and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll get into the nice, juicy stuff about, organization and all that good jazz.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the beauty of it is, and I love when I'm talking to other coaches or when that's like an audience, because I can relate to that because I'm an entrepreneur myself. I mean, way before I started the podcast, I started a business called Simply Be Organized. And it started as, a professional organizing business where I was actually going into people's homes and helping them with the declutter and organizing process. And then over the years, that was like 15 years ago, and it's grown and evolved to more speeching and coaching and more consulting about understanding where your clutter comes from. Because at the end of the day, clutter is really just a symptom of something else that's going on. And so we all address the physical clutter, the piles of paper, laundry, all the, if you're, you have kids at home, lots of toys, clothes, all that. We look at that, but really the root of a great organizing strategy, or I shouldn't even say a great organizing strategy, but a sustainable organizing strategy is all about refining what you have, prioritizing what you need, and creating a system that allows you to easily retrieve what you are looking for. Whether that's you're looking for documents on your computer, whether that's looking for your car keys, whether that's looking for, you fill in the blank. It doesn't matter. And that's the beauty of the universal approach that I take. It's all about simplicity, right? It's all about how can we make this really simple? There's so many, philosophies out there. And a lot of times things can get overcomplicated and you think you have to do all the things. And I'm here to tell you, you have to find the thing that works for you. But ultimately, it's about understanding yourself, where you struggle and how you can kind of work with what you're dealing with in the season of life that you're in. I'm sure, I don't know about your audience, maybe you guys can tell me, are a lot of them single people? Are they juggling kind of work family? Because I know that's where I was when I started my business. And that is a whole other layer of just trying to kind of organize your time.
I would say that as far as like married or single, I'm not really sure on that. But what I would say is that there's probably a large portion of this audience that is trying to find that balance between three things, which is family, their day job, and then also getting this business either up and running or growing it to a certain point to where they could then go full time and quit the day job. Right. So that's, I mean, you have like your regular entrepreneur who is, focusing on growing their business and having the family. And that's the two, finding the balance between those two. But I think what makes this audience unique is that they're probably trying to juggle three things at once, which is family, job, and business.
Okay. All right. So I love this. This is so important. So one of the things that, and I'm not going to come in here and just prescribe a one size fits all, but I just want to give people like different takeaways to think about. I look at our calendar. I talk about three different types of clutter, right? Let's go back a step. When I talk about clutter and organization, I look at it in three main big kind of buckets. Obviously, the physical stuff that we talked about. Then we talked about that emotional clutter. Now, emotional clutter is more about guilt and fear, and it could be in relating to the entrepreneurial sense of like that mental struggle of I should be working more or I should be spending more family time. But emotional clutter, we're not going to focus too much in on that today. What I think is really more relevant for your listeners is what I call calendar clutter. And calendar clutter is really having more things on your to-do list than time to do them. And so if you have the analogy and you have a picture in your mind of a closet that is pretty full already, it's filled with clothes, shoes, bags, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you just start adding more stuff in. You're like, oh, I'm going to add a whole other category of clothes into that closet, but you're not going to take anything out. That is what happens to a lot of our calendars. Now that happens whether you're an entrepreneur or not, just because that's a societal thing, but we won't even get into that. But you layer on entrepreneurship, and most of us have entered into an entrepreneurial journey because it's a passion project for us. We want to maybe turn this into a full-time business. Maybe we're just looking to do this as a side hustle. Maybe it's just something else that we're very interested in. So we want to do this. We want to spend time. But how much time do we realistically have to dedicate to our business when we have all of these other buckets, like you said, your day job, your family, and then just life of running a household and all the things. And I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs get really burned out. And what happens is we wind up addressing what's in front of us as opposed to necessarily addressing what's really important and prioritizing. Because it's like, this is like low hanging, and especially in your business, when it comes to, oh, I have a potential client or I have a potential this. I'm scrappy. I totally get it. I was a grassroots, started this business from like nothing. And so I'm all about that. But what I think one of the biggest pitfalls that I see entrepreneurs and in any field is fall into is not setting those boundaries and holding themselves accountable the way that they would maybe tell their clients to be accountable for their budget. You know, in my case, it would be I coach and mentor professional organizers, and here they are, teaching and preaching and coaching all of these different organizing strategies, but they're not taking their own advice when it comes to organizing their own time. Does that land with you guys?
It does for me. I don't know if you meant to do this intentionally, but I picked up on this.
Okay.
But you kind of like compared the organization between your time, and in your calendar in particular, with, how these coaches on this show would also kind of coach their own clients to, organize their own budget as well. And I think that it's actually really common, like very similar, like organizing your finances and with a budget is one thing, but if you almost look at your time and your calendar like a budget as well, I also think that could be like very beneficial as well. I don't know. What do you think about that, Maria?
I think given the different kinds of budgets, I think we have to be careful. And what I mean by that is a zero-based budget, for example.
Mm-hmm.
A zero-based budget teaches you to spend every dollar on paper on purpose ahead of the month and et cetera. And I just think that given personalities, it might be really not a good idea to spend every second on paper on purpose. I don't know. I think, I'm not the professional though. So Lauri, I definitely want you to weigh in on that because go ahead.
I love that. Okay. So I agree. And that is another issue where I feel like when we're talking about organizing our time, that doesn't mean that every single space has to get, or every single hour or every single minute has to be accounted for.
Yeah.
I have a good friend of mine who's an interior designer, and years ago, we were having a conversation and we were talking about the white space. Now, I'm not a designer. I mean, I love design, but I'm not like a designer by trade. And she was talking about in design school, they would teach you about intentionally incorporating the white space into a room. You don't have every single space has a picture or a thing on it. And we approach that in organizing too. And I'm going to relate it back to you guys as well, where not every shelf, not every cabinet, not everything has to be filled to capacity, because when we do that, we leave no time for margin, and our calendars are prime examples of that. Life happens. Things go sideways. You have sick kids. You have computer issues. You have a delay, a traffic jam on the freeway, and you're late to something. So life is going to happen. And so when I'm looking at any type of organizing, whether it's your physical space or your calendar, I don't necessarily take that zero-based budget approach because I want that buffer in there. So I'm a big believer, a big proponent of time blocking. I also don't think that there's a one size fits all. So I have some people that are like, I want to do a Pomodoro method. I want to do 20 minutes on and then 5 minutes off or whatever. You know what I mean? Like take these little breaks. I've got other people that are like, no, I want to just keep my head down and plow through for 4 hours straight. And you mentioned personality. A lot of the framework that I do, a lot of the approach that I take really takes into account people's personalities. Doesn't give them a pass for things, but not every system is going to work for everybody. And I think it's really about establishing what are your goals? What is it? Just like you would if you were as a financial coach sitting down with somebody. What are the goals? What are you trying to do? I mean, obviously people want to stay out of debt. They probably want to feel secure that they have, money safety, but some people want to spend their money on trips. Other people want to spend their money, want to save more. Other people want to buy, expensive handbags, whatever it is, but it's about knowing and taking that proactive approach. And I think what happens is when it comes to organization, and we're really talking about organizing our time as entrepreneurs, we oftentimes operate in a very reactive mode, as opposed to saying, I'm going to control my schedule. We kind of maybe loosely think about like, yeah, I'm going to do this, but then the first thing that happens, things go sideways. And so it's really about that accountability, that the beauty of it is your listeners are already doing with their finances and they're already teaching that to their clients. It's just about, like you said, Cody, how can I kind of modify that and just tweak that to have that light bulb moment of treating my schedule the way I would a budget.
Yeah. I think that one of the biggest challenges for people, and this is something that I even kind of struggle with too, especially with trying to find that balance between my business and my family, is just knowing, like, how do you prioritize these things when everything seems important or everything seems like it has to be done like right now, kind of thing. Like, you know, it gets kind of overwhelming for me sometimes, you know, and I'm sure for other people as well. So, I mean, I don't know if you have any insight on that, but like, how would you prioritize these things?
I think it's about, first of all, I think it's kind of knowing your why, right? Like, what are your goals? Like, what are you trying to do with you know, when it comes to your entrepreneurship, right? Because you could prioritize things at the detriment of going to your kid's soccer game. And I'm not judging anybody, right? I'm not saying everyone's in a different season of life, but you could say, you know, I want to have, the goal is everybody wants to, you know, build their business, build their practice, make money, change lives, have that be impactful. But what you need to do is oftentimes we see an opportunity and we feel like we need to jump on it and react. And so my first thing is really define what are the times that I'm going to be working on my business. And as an entrepreneur, we'll take that bucket, right? So you've got other things going on. You've got your day job, you've got your family life, and then you have your entrepreneurship. So let's just look at that and take that out of, that and put it off to the side. So if we're just looking at that entrepreneurship, what I do is there's a couple of different ways you can approach it, but one of the ways you could do is kind of reverse engineer it. Say, I've got 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever that magic number is that I am willing to dedicate, right? Just like your budget. I have this amount of money. So this is the pot that I'm working with. And so there's two ways that you can approach it. This is the first one. That's the pot that you have to work with. How am I going to divide that up? Am I going to work 2 hours every night? So I'm going to come home from work, do my thing. And then after I put the kids to bed, I'm going to spend 2 hours working on my financial coaching practice, right? And then kind of looking at it that way. Or you could flip the script and say, I'm looking to make X amount of money per month right? And say, what do I need to do in order to make that? What does that realistically look like? Because oftentimes when I'm coaching people, I'll have them do both. I'll say, how often do you, how much do you want to work? And they might say, I want to work, 20 hours a week or whatever that number is. And I say, okay, great. And then we look also at what does that look like? What would kind of map out a makeshift schedule. And then I'll say, how much money in a perfect world, but realistically in a perfect world, how much money do you want to make? Like, what would make you feel like I'm moving the needle, right? In this season, right? Is that $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, $5,000 a month? What does that look like, right? What is that magic number? And oftentimes when they do them separately, they'll see based on the formula that they're using, what they charge, how much time they're putting in, those two numbers don't equal up. So I might have somebody that says, I want to work 10 hours a week and I want to make $5,000 a month. And when I go, okay, well, let's just take the emotion out of it. Let's just look at the math. Those numbers don't even up. So are you going to spend more time, raise your prices? Like, what are you going to do? So prioritizing, what are you willing to sacrifice and what boundaries are you willing to put in? And I think it's very important for entrepreneurs to take their own advice, because as business owners, we have a lot of stake in the game and we love what we do and we want to do it. And so setting those boundaries of, I'm turning off my computer after a certain time. I'm putting my phone away after a certain time. I'm not responding every time somebody sends me a text or an email. And this is when I'm going to be in my financial coaching work mode. And that's when I respond and communicating that. And I think the key is communicating that with your clients, communicating that with your teammates, communicating that with your family. This is when I'm available. This is when I do things. Because what happens is if you set that stage up front, this is how I work. I will get back to you within 24 hours. If you respond to me after hours, I will respond to you in the morning. Whatever that looks like in your world, you are training your clients to have an expectation. If you constantly respond to them every time they send you a text, and then you want to be like, oh my God, I'm so responsive. Let me do this. And trust me, people, I've fallen into that trap. I've done that where it's like, oh my God, people are texting me. When I first started, people would be like, hey, do you know where my daughter's, backpack is? Well, it wasn't even something as important as that. Like, people would be texting me all hours of the early morning, late at night. And you can pick and choose when you want to respond. But I think if you start off by being super, super overly responsive, then you are letting people know that you're available 24/7. And then eventually when you try to kind of put some parameters in place, it's a little bit harder. So starting to establish those boundaries. And if you're like, oh gosh, I don't have any boundaries, how do I do it? I think it's fine. I think it's like setting that expectation of, you know what, I am just prioritizing this and letting your clients know, hey, this is when I be, if you don't hear from me within, 12 hours, whatnot, or I will respond to you within fill in the blank. And the right people will understand. And if you have a client or a potential client that expects you to be at their beck and call, they're probably not the right people for you anyway, because they don't understand boundaries. And that is, I always say, not every client's a good client. And so the majority of people will respect you and probably admire the fact that you are establishing those boundaries for yourself, because we are oftentimes the first ones to abandon ship on our own, things that we put in place for ourselves.
Yeah. I really like the two words that you said over and over and over, which I think is the most important ones, which was boundaries and communication. Once you kind of like figure out that formula of like how much time, how much money do I want to spend, which then, it does kind of lie in like where you're at as far as how to prioritize things. The boundaries and communication is really important, for both your clients, but also for those of those who are listening that have families. Very important. And that's something that, so you said you learned that the hard way. I learned that the hard way too. Not with this practice, but with what I was doing before I was doing this. I was in the music industry, and every band wants you to book their show every single day of the week, right? Like they want to play shows, right? And I was so invested into music because at that time it was like my biggest passion. And I was just like music, everything. It's like, it's what I breathe. It's what I eat. It's everything. Right. But then there was a couple years where there was some bands from my city who wanted me to book their show, and they were asking me about booking their band on Christmas Day. And it was then that I was like, are you seriously hitting me up about a local show on Christmas? Like, come on. And I was actually pretty upset with them. But then I took a second and I was like, well, why are they doing this? Because I've allowed it to happen, And at that point I like hit them up and I told them like, dude, it's Christmas. I'll get back to you in 3 days, like that kind of thing. And then when I got back with them, I kind of let them know like, hey, this was not cool, blah, blah, blah. We're good. But this was on me too. I should have communicated this with you. And then moving forward, I did that with every single person. This is when I'm going to respond to you. This is when I'm going to stop responding to you. And I was so much happier. And my wife was way happier too. Let me tell you, she was way happier.
And I don't know. I love that story. And if I can share a story also that I think, it's not similar, but it made me think of this particular, scenario when I was building up my business and I was really just looking to get clients, right? I wanted to get clients. I wanted to grow my business. And originally I was like, oh, sure. Now I had young kids. So I knew that it had to be while they were in school because that was just what I had my availability. But originally I was like, I would work 6 days a week, right? As long as my husband was in town on Saturday, I could do it. I was like, yes, I'll work here, I'll work there. And I was taking on all these jobs and then my business started picking up. And I went through this one stretch where I was just working nonstop, with clients. And then I was still coming home and having to put my mom hat on and do all the things. And after a month, I was like burnt out and I was snapping at my kids and it was just, I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. And I started looking at, okay, this is not sustainable. And the other pieces to the puzzle of as an entrepreneur, part of your job is not just doing the thing, working with the client. It's running your business, running your practice. So it's that whole working on your business versus working in your business. And so when I was saying, okay, I have X amount of hours that I'm going to dedicate to my business, I didn't originally factor in the working on. And I was like, oh yeah, so I've got 20 hours. Let me book 20 hours worth of client work. But then I was like, okay, well, who's going to invoice? Who's going to send follow up? Who's going to do the research? Who's going to do this? And so all these little things started like falling through the cracks, and I was playing catch up. And I said, this is insane. So I, pumped the brakes, and I started establishing a routine for each day of the week. So I was working every day, but not every day was necessarily a client. Not every day was what I called billable hours. So I was like, these are the days that I'm going to do this. So I basically broke down and chunked what are the different functions that I'm responsible for? Because early on, I didn't have somebody helping me with social media. I didn't have somebody helping me do all these different things. So I had to look at what are all of the different entrepreneurial hats that I'm wearing in my business, not just the expertise of being a professional organizer or a financial coach. What are the other things that I need to do in order to grow and build my practice, and factor that into the equation when I'm looking at the realistic amount of time I have? Because what happens is then those things that are really important, we go back to that earlier question of the urgent, like what's important and what falls through the cracks. We let things go, like, maybe you guys don't because you're financial coaches, but like a lot of entrepreneurs, they'll be like, yeah, I'm not really checking my P&L. I'm just putting money in there. I'm not putting my money, but I'm not really being on top of what my true finances are, right? Maybe that's not a problem for you guys, but, I'm not organizing my office. So I have stuff everywhere and then I don't even know I have client materials or deliverables, or my inbox is overflowing, or whatever it is, because you're so busy being on the go that you have no time to organize the business. And so factoring that is something that was really hard, because a lot of that stuff isn't necessarily fun. It's not necessarily revenue generating, but if you're a solopreneur, you're doing all the things, right? You're editing your own podcast, and you are, doing all your own, accounting and receivables and social media. You have to account for the time that that's going to take, in addition to the business development, seeing clients, all the other things.
Yeah. If I may, I want to go back to something you said several minutes ago, and it was the whole idea of getting to the why of what you're doing and having that be one of the things that allows you to decipher what is truly urgent and what is truly important in the time. And you actually have kind of alluded to it a couple times. At one point, you said something about, if there's a kid's soccer game. And so I'd like to talk about that for a second. And I think you just alluded to it again a couple seconds ago. But the idea of knowing what is important to you and why you're doing this in the first place. If you are doing this, let's just say you're a parent and you're doing this so that your children can have more freedom, or so that you can spend more time with them. And then all of these little bits and pieces of the business are actually taking that away from you. That's probably a pretty good indicator that you're not prioritizing the things that you actually wanted to do in the first place. So if your kid has a game and it happens to be on one of those hours that you originally set aside, if it's not a billable hour and it's something that you can switch to another spot, you have permission to do that. I don't think that that's crossing a boundary, right? That's actually putting into place the things that you intended to do in the first place. So that's one thing that I wanted to just kind of point out. But I heard you say that it's so important for us to follow our own advice. And I just want to throw out there right now that that's why coaches need coaches, because it is super important for us to follow our own advice. And yet it's one of the most difficult things to do, because we can't see our own blind spots. We are really, really good at helping other people find theirs, but we're not always really great at seeing our own. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. And that's probably why you coach other people who help coach people. It's why we do what we do here at New Money Habits as well, and it's why we have our own coaches as well, because we know that we have those blind spots. And then if I could, I know you said that you were not going to do too much about the mental clutter.
Oh, I'll do whatever you guys want. Okay, absolutely. Cool. Yeah.
I'm curious, because you mentioned that I do. Well, and I think it's mostly because of what you said earlier, Lauri, and that was that our physical clutter is oftentimes just a symptom of something else that's going on inside. And so many times that's exactly what our financial clients are doing too. It's a symptom of other stuff that's going on. And so I would just love if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about what are some of the things that are going on inside those minds of ours. I mean, I know some people have, coined ADHD, adult ADHD, even though it's not something that's truly an issue for them, but it kind of feels that way because their mind is super cluttered. Can you talk to that a little bit for us, please?
Yeah. And I think, and again, not to be so nitpicky, but just to geek out a little bit.
Yeah.
They're all related, but there's the mental load, right? The mental load of like, I have to do all the things, right? Like I have this running ticker in my mind of like, I gotta get a birthday card to somebody's anniversary. We got to do this. I got to go to the grocery store. I have to pick up the soccer cleats. I have to do whatever it is, right? So that's more of like mental load of that ongoing to-do list. And then we have what I call emotional clutter, which I deem as more that guilt, fear, that false narrative that we tell ourselves, that little voice. And emotional clutter could really encompass and encroach in a multitude of areas. It could be the physical stuff of like, I can't get rid of this because my kid made this for me, or so-and-so gave this to me, so I feel guilty about it, or I bought this and it was a lot of money and so I can't get rid of it. So that's like a lot of emotional clutter, right? That holds you back. But it's also fear. And I think when we talk about entrepreneurships, it's that fear of what if. And when it comes to not respecting our boundaries and not respecting our time and trying to build something that is a risk, and you're doing it, and there's, depending on what your stakes are, right? So like for some people, it's probably really high stakes. For other people, they're like, I just want to build this and I have a day job and like, let me see where it goes. But when you start following the what if this is the call, right? Kind of like when you were saying, Cody, about the music. What if this is the one show that is like, I'm going to get discovered, or like, this is going to be the one big thing. And so we tell ourselves, just like with our clutter of, I might need this someday. And that holds us back from getting rid of it. It's the same thing with our boundaries. We tell ourselves, I have to do this. We have this false ticker going on saying, if I want to achieve X, Y, and Z, I need to do all of this. Or if I don't do this, or if I don't respond, somebody's going to go to find another financial coach, or whatever the fake story is that we're telling ourselves. And I think a lot of it is we as a society have stuff coming at us from every direction, every crevice, 24/7. And if you start turning some of that stuff off, you're swimming upstream, you're going against the grain, and it feels so countercultural. And I know it's a work in progress for me because I'm on this like journey to like reduce the amount of time I'm on, on my phone, especially with social media. And it's hard. It is hard, to be able to put those practices in place. But the more that you can start to do it, the less guilty you feel. And the more that you have that what if. Like when I talk to somebody that's struggling with physical clutter, I'm like, let's see it through, right? So what would be the worst thing that happens? You get rid of this. Let's role play here, right? So you get rid of this thing that your mom gave you, this thing that your kid made for you, this, whatever it is. What's the worst that can happen? Like, let's walk through the scenarios. And when you walk through it, 9 times out of 10, the client will say, yeah, you're right. It's just my feelings that are getting in the way. And it's not really, it's not really factual or logical. And when it comes to our businesses, there's a lot of emotion tied to that. This is an emotional investment, and we're not always using logic to make those decisions, and we're reacting emotionally, not setting those boundaries. And I do want, so Adam, does that answer your question? I don't even know.
Yeah, I just wanted you to speak to it a little bit. So I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah. And the other thing I just want to say, based on like what your kind of rebuttal was to me about like taking time off to go to your kid's game, I believe in boundaries, and I believe in establishing routines and repetition because I think it helps us. However, that being said, I think things should be fluid. And I think we have to understand and give ourselves some grace that there is going to be some give and take. But what I encourage people to do, so like for me, I would take off, I wouldn't see clients on Fridays, right? I set this boundary of like, these are the days that I see clients. And, I used to see clients Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And those were the days that when I would communicate with somebody, these are the days that I would see clients. And at first it was very scary because I was like, what if somebody's like, I don't want to work with you then? But I realized once I communicated that to them, 9 times out of 10, that was totally fine. And on the rare occasion, I had somebody that said, you know what? I really can only see you on a Friday. I would make that exception, but then I would reclaim another day during the week to do the things I was going to do on Friday. So I'm not, again, adding in. I'm like, okay, I'm replacing so that I'm still holding that boundary of, okay, I needed time to do whatever other things I was working on during those times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It wasn't a rebuttal, by the way.
Oh, I was just
adding in.
I would say, yeah. Well, I didn't mean that in a bad way, but your response.
Okay. It's like, you didn't say anything wrong there. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So you have shared so much with us in terms of just like techniques that we can do, things to think about, ways to apply what you're doing, not necessarily with financial coaches, but ways to apply that to what our financial coaches are doing in their business and with their clients. This has been super, super valuable.
I'm so glad. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad that you guys are doing what you're doing because financial literacy is so important and there's not enough people that have normalized it. And I think it's so great that you guys are out here, just educating people on how to, reclaim control over their finances and their lives because we all know the impact that has. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that. I have 2 questions for you
before
we let you go, before we wrap up. Number 1 would be, if you were to speak directly to someone who's listening today, and there's someone who knows that they have a hard time staying organized, whether it be the physical, the emotional, or the calendar organization, what would be like that one thing that you would just want them to know or for them to take that first action step to really help them take that first step of like becoming more organized in those areas?
Okay. So the first thing I want them to know is that they're not alone and they're not destined to be like that forever, right? There are strategies. Just like if somebody's in debt doesn't mean you always have to stay in debt, right? There are strategies. And some people have to work a little bit harder, right? There are some people that whether it's they have a neurodiversity or they've just they never had healthy modeled behavior and they just don't know. So there are some people that have to work a little bit harder. But what I would say is remove the unnecessary. Any organization system has to begin with removing the stuff that doesn't belong. That's like step 1 for everything. And identifying, and again, maybe you're not removing it all at once, right? But that's the first thing. Before you can begin to organize, just like before you can begin to build wealth, you got to get rid of your debt. And it's the same thing. So you want to get rid of the things that are taking up unnecessary mental and physical space. So that would be kind of my first tip or strategy.
Trimming the fat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Love it. Good stuff there. And then my second question for you is, for anyone who wants to get connected with you, learn more about you, or maybe even like listen to your own show, where can they find that? What's the name of everything? One more time. We know at the beginning of the
absolutely.
podcast,
I
tell
appreciate
people
it.
where they can find you.
I appreciate it. So obviously, if you like listen to podcasts, you could find my show, This Organized Life, on any of your streaming platforms. And we've got quick tips. We've got long episodes. We've got a ton of stuff out there. So feel free to go and, choose your own adventure and, to work with me. And I have tons of free resources. I have a new business checklist. I do have a lot of like freebies because again, I do coach entrepreneurs, primarily in the organizing space. But a lot of the checklists and things that we have on there are relevant to any small business owner. And all our stuff can be found at simply the letter B, like boy, organized.com. So that's simply beorganized.com. And, feel free to reach out. I'm here to help.
Awesome. Love it. Well, hey, Lauri, thank you again for being on the show. It was a lot of fun. I'm looking at my desk and I'm like on fire to get it cleaned up. So.
I love it.
I'm looking at my brain thinking the same thing.
Yeah. So, but yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in again this week. Special shout out to those every weekers, like Maria said at the top of the episode. We hope to catch you for the next episode next week. And until then, stay focused, stay intentional, and stay organized too. So you guys take care.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our hosts by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.